Right, so now what I want to do is the image container, which is on the right. So let's go ahead and create this component. So on the left-hand side where the modules is, we need to create a new file named image container and RAFCE in here. So now all we need to do is render out the 5 images that we have and also import in the image container. So first off, we have the outer div, which is fine. And then inside, we want to have 3 columns. So if I do column 1, then column 2, and column 3. So now the outer div is going to contain all of the 3 columns of the images inside. So this is going to have a class name of a margin top of 14, first of all, a display of flex, justify content to the end because we want it on the right of the page. So justify end, and then it's going to have a gap for each of the images. So each of the columns is going to have a gap, and that is going to be 8 pixels, so gap 8. And then on small screens going up, what we want to do is have a minus margin top, so minus MT of 44. Also on small screens, we want to have a justify start. And also on small screens, we're going to have a padding left of 20. So now what we want to do is on large screens, so essentially everything up to gap 8 is the base style, and then we are styling as per the screen size or the media query. So on large screens, we want a margin top of 0. And also on large screens, we want a padding left of 0. So now, if I save that, let's just check how the image container is, even though there's nothing in there. So we need to render some images now. So let's go ahead and render the first column out. And what I'm actually going to do is create the image component, because if we look at it, the image itself, this styling for each image is the same. The only difference is the source or the URL that is being rendered. So we can create that, and then each column is basically just positioning the image or the 2 images based on the relative or fixed position that we pass it. So what I'm going to do is create the image itself, and then we'll pass in the source as a prop. So first of all, let's do that. So at the top over here, I'm going to create a function, and this function is going to be called the image itself, like so. And this is just going to be a functional component, and all we are going to be doing is returning. In here, what we will have is the prop, so it's going to be the source and then the alt as well, or the alt text or whatever you want to call it. And then we can render that in here. So image is equal to the source and the image alt here. So first source I already have. So let me just copy this and paste it in the source over here. And then the alt text is going to be the basketball court. So let me go ahead and do that. So now if I save, all we need to do is in here, we need to render that out. So first of all, this div is going to be of class name relative. So let's do that now. And then in here, we're going to have the image that we have. So the source is going to be the source that we receive from the props, and also the alt is going to be from the props, like so. So if we save that, we should have something being rendered. But what I want to do is add the class name for the image itself. So if I just go into the browser and check what is being rendered, so in our app, you can see now the image is being pulled through, so that's fine. I mean, that looks good in itself, but what we want to do is have the effect that we have on the main app. So now all I want to do is in the image class name, we need to do that. So let's first of all fix the types on here. So this is the reusable component that we are passing in over here. We're passing in the source and the alt props, and then the class name is going to be here. So we're going to be using it as a width of full. It's going to be rounded extra large, so rounded -XL, which means the border radius is going to be round. We're going to have object fit of cover, so that's object cover, and we also are going to have a shadow of large. So all of these are helpful for using our style. So instead of typing out all of that, we can just use the class name of shadow-LG. And then one final one we need to add is the aspect ratio. Now, we talked about plugins before. This is another plugin that we can use. So aspect ratio. So this one is going to be dash, and then we can do 2/3, which means that 2 is the width and 3 is the height. Now, what I want to do is go into the plugins and implement this. So let's first of all save that. And if we go into our app, it's still the same, but it needs to be relevant. So when we shrink it down, it will be the same aspect ratio. So now what I want to do is if we go into the plugins tab over here, and we have the aspect ratio one here. So essentially the Tailwind aspect ratio plugin is an alternative to the native aspect ratio support that works for all browsers. So essentially it's what we are doing here, which is a width and a height. So a width is 2 and a height is 3, or you could do aspect width of X or N or whatever it is, and the same for the height. If we click here, this then tells you how to install it. So if we can copy this, and again, we just need to add this into our Tailwind plugins, and then we can use it. So let's go back into our code, and then all I want to do is yarn add Tailwind CSS / aspect ratio, and then in our Tailwind config.js, all we need to do is essentially just add it in here as well. So we have the Tailwind CSS typography. We're not going to be using it, but you can use it yourself if you just look at the plugins page on the browser. So typography, no, but we are using the aspect ratio. So if I now save all, and then when we run yarn dev, it will restart everything for us. And again, it says here, re-optimize dependencies because the lock file has changed. So that's fine. We just need to close it off. And now that is the image style complete. So now what we need to do is style the div around the image. So let's focus on column 1 first of all. So this is a div, and this div only has the one image inside it. So let's focus on that. And what I'm going to do is bring in the styles and explain them. So essentially we have a margin left of auto, a width of 11 rem, a flex of none. We have space of on the y-axis of 8. So essentially we've split it up here. So at the top here we have a gap of 8. So that's the gap in between the 3 columns. But if there are multiple images in the column itself, then what will happen is it'll give that space there. But because this has no space, then it's just going to show as it is. But again, if we was to add multiple images in there, then what will happen is it will add the space in. We have a padding top of 32, which brings the image down to the lower amount. And then for small screens, we don't want a margin left. And we also want a padding top at the top. And then for larger screens, we want to order it last. So it's going to be the last image in the order. And again, for large screens, we have a padding top of 36. And then no order in extra large. And again, padding top on 80 here. So let's just check that out. So now you can see it's specifically positioned in its relevant place that it needs to be. So now all we need to do is position the other one. So column 2 and column 3 here, similar to the final builds, just like so. So these will be positioned in the relevant places. So all I'm going to do is essentially just copy it, and it's pretty much the same thing. Just going to copy column 2 and bring that in here. And let's check column 2 out. So now you can see column 2 is like so, and then finally the last column as well, so column 3. And if you want to look at the styles, they will be available in the repo later on, but essentially that is column 3. Now what I've done is I've brought in the old code. Now we need to optimize it to use our image component. So this is quite simple. We just pass it in the image component here, and then remove this class name, and this div here, it needs to move to the image component. So we'll do that in a second. So let's just delete this one and the class name. And then at the top here, under the image, we add another div in, but this div is absolute, and essentially it's just the border for the image itself. So now all I need to do is the last column. So let me just remove it from here, remove the class name, and this is the image here. Again, with the final image, which is the component, and again, this is it here. So now if I save, We now have all of the images rendering on the page. If I close this one off as well, you can see now that the styles are being rendered and this is the exact same. All I want to do now is check that it is responsive. So if I shrink the screen size, you can see it's adjusting to the relevant screen size. And then you can see here for the small screen size, that is looking quite neat. So as you can see, the images go off the page because that's the styling, and then the text shows above. So that is the hero banner complete. Next, what we'll do is add the grid, so the product grid, which is this one over here.